Hello, welcome to the Social Justice Forum. I am Daren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you're asking the question, what is the show all about? Well, we bring you a forum discussing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities that many communities face, from systemic inequalities to pressing social problems. Our guests provide multiple perspectives and insights, helping us better understand and address these challenges. So we invite you to stay connected to us. The Social Justice Forum starts now. And welcome back. The shift towards remote work has reshaped the modern workplace by offering flexibility and autonomy to employees across industries. However, a new wave of return to office mandates is challenging that trend. With President Donald Trump ordering federal workers back to the office, many people are asking, is the era of remote work coming to an end? Join me now, professor at the Columbia Business School, Rita McGrath. And Rita, thank you so much for joining us and so much for sharing in this conversation, because as we do know, and I said, a lot of people right now have gotten used since COVID to this work from home environment, but right now, a challenge.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So when we talk about the challenge, how do you see it?
Well, the tussle, right, is that I think a lot of what bosses have traditionally counted on is what you might call serendipitous bonding, right? So this idea of you hang out at the water cooler and you kind of meet each other, and it happens by accident because you're all physically sort of in the same place. And they miss that. Right. So there's some research that says on a 5-point scale, and this is work that was done by Keith Ferrazzi, on a 5-point scale, if you measure serendipitous bonding, you get to about 2.8. And during the pandemic, it dropped down to about 2.3. But 2.8 is not great, right? So I think what bosses are hungry for is that deeper cultural norm creation, that being all together in the same place matters. So you've got these really kind of very conflicting issues, right? So for young people, there's a lot of evidence that shows that being in a place where you've got older people to mentor you and show you the ropes and teach you is very, very beneficial. But it also shows that for older people, who already have their networks and they've already got the lay of the land done, for them, they love the freedom and the ability. So you got all these really conflicting tensions around where we get our work done.
Yeah. When we talk about the federal government, obviously this return to work mandate, a lot of people not happy about it. Talk to me about the morale and the morale aspect, and also what are we going to be able to get out of employees given the fact that they're being demanded back to work?
Well, it betrays a lack of trust, right? It basically says we need you, we need you to clock in and out as though you were kindergartners. I mean, there's there's a real kind of human dimension to this, which robs people of their agency and basically communicates, we know what's best for you in terms of where you work. It's almost an industrial age mentality, right? And I think for morale, I don't think it's great. I think for a lot of people, hearing that message and being told, well, we can't trust you to get work done if you're not sort of under our thumbs, is a very depressing message.
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of people take it as such, right? Like, if we can't trust you to do work at home, get in here so we can watch you.
Right.
That's an issue. That's an issue of trust. And when you come back to the workplace, obviously there'll be some people who won't necessarily. It won't necessarily always be a hostile environment, but there will be an environment that's conducive to, like, oh, Big Brother's watching. I really don't enjoy being in this environment.
Exactly. Have you heard the phrase coffee badging?
No, go ahead, tell me about
So this is
it.
where this is where employees will get to the office. So clearly these are people with a short commute. They'll get to the office, they'll badge in, they'll have a cup of coffee, and then they leave.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's how.
But now, Big Brother is fighting back now, because what they're saying is you don't have just to badge in, you also have to badge out, and we're going to watch you, while you're doing your badging. Which I just think this is like, what have we come to in the workplace where this is necessary, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's where we are today. I think a lot of people have gotten accustomed to working from home. I think we found out that there's productivity. I've talked to several people who are business owners. They've said I've been able to save money by not having people per se in a brick and mortar environment. And as long as I'm getting the productivity and I'm getting the bottom line met, I'm okay. But then when we talk about federal government, it's not the same. It's not the same. And so therefore you've got that, you got that tension. Do you see this tension playing out over a long period of time?
Oh, I do. I absolutely do. Well, there's a backdrop of bigger tensions too, which is if you look at the size of the federal government since Ronald Reagan's administration declared war on government, it has not kept pace at all with either the size of our economy or the size of our population. And so what we have is critical understaffing in everything from air traffic controllers to people that are processing, asylum applications. I mean, there's no reason somebody should have to wait 3 years to get an asylum application approved, except that we just haven't appropriately directed resources toward those things. And so you've got people who are already really trying very hard to serve the public, but they're very overworked. They're not at the top of the economic pay scale, but and now on top of it all, they're being told, where and how to do their work. It's kind of a toxic mess.
Yeah. Well, we talk about Elon Musk for a moment, and the Musk factor is what I like to call it. The fact that he's actually uh, looking for in person and this demand for in person. How much does the Musk factor play into what we're seeing right now?
Well, Musk has been very clear about that in his own private companies. So this isn't
Right.
just a government thing. So here's the thing about Musk's management style. He believes that people should be very autonomous in what they do. And I kind of, this is an area where I kind of am on his side. And so he'll say, when you come to work, say at a Tesla factory, you literally don't know what you're going to be doing that day. And you go to where you feel you can add the most value. They call it the law of 2 feet, right? So your 2 feet take you to where you can do your best. So even if you're like a trained accountant, if the place where you can add the most value is figuring how to get the robot to attach a tire more quickly,
Hmm.
that's where you go. And so the reason people need to be in person in that environment is because you can't pre-plan it and you can't do it like away from the physical space. And I think he wants to bring some of that ethos to the government.
Right. Do you think that his leadership style is something that will catch on uh, across the country?
Well, he's unique. I don't think there are very many leaders that are like him.
Yeah.
What I do think, though, that we are seeing now as organizations, and this is a bigger picture thing, organizations are getting a lot more distributed because we're dealing with complexity in the environment. So if I were to go back to, say, the 1950s, what
Hmm.
what I think we had there was really complicated environments. So you're running General Motors or something, and you got to get a huge factory processing at speed. And you could really run that through a hierarchy. And the idea was you had operate exactly, copy, mass production, everything's got to be the same. With a digital economy, what we're having is much more distributed organizations. And ironically, what we're finding in those kinds of organizations, the place where it all comes together is what you can think of as a benevolent dictator type of leader. And
Mm.
that's sort of what Musk is. That's what Steve Jobs was. That's kind of what Jeff Bezos is. And I think it's interesting because these are not command and control leaders, but they're very engaged leaders.
Right. And this kind of engaging leader is the emerging leader as we're seeing in society these days. I mean, when you think about, you talk about Musk, you talk about Jobs, you talk about Bezos, right? They approach things a little bit differently. And that difference is what's really shaking the core of what we're seeing in our societal structure because we've been so used to seeing things from what we will call a normal perspective, but they're bringing something that's different. And for an employer, you got to take a look and say, listen, they've got a multi-billion-dollar business. Maybe there's some advantage in taking a look at some of these practices.
Oh, I think there is. So here's why I think this matters. It's because we're really in the transition. And I think this matters for the theme of your show.
Mhm.
We're in the transition from this sort of fossil fuel based highways, suburbs, mass production environment to digital, more local, more distributed, much more kind of asset light environment. We're really in that transition. And we're only beginning to see what that's going to look like.
Right. Rita McGrath is the professor at the Columbia Business School. We've been breaking down remote work and coming back to the office. Let's do this for a second, Rita. Talk to me about someone who says, uh, I want to analyze both sides. I want to analyze in person and I want to analyze remote work. Let's go in person right now. If a person is in person, what are the pros of having an in person work environment?
Well, more culture, more mentoring for young people, more opportunities for serendipitous bonding, more opportunities for learning, um, tighter relationships, the building of social ties as well as work ties, and more collaborative problem solving. So I think if you've got a really new problem you want to solve, it's really hard to do that over Zoom. Like if I'm trying to figure out, what does robotic infrastructure combined with AI mean for the construction of mobile homes? You're not going to solve that with 15 people on a Zoom call. You really need people around a whiteboard with post-it notes and being creative and that kind of thing. So
Right.
that's in person.
And then when you talk about the remote perspective, what is the advantages of remote?
Remote is you can tap into talent from anywhere. It allows people who are differentially abled, to participate. So, let's say you have a handicap. Well, nobody needs to know that in many cases if you're remote. So you can tap into different talent. You can really leverage people's asynchronous capability. People can work at their own pace. They can work at the time of day that suits them. You can get a lot more independence. You can get a lot more creative thinking, and you can really tap into different kinds of employees. So I think there's a lot to be said for remote as well.
Yeah, I was remembering the conversation that was had with a couple of people when it comes to remote, and what they said was, "This has done so much for me and family that even though I've got to work, it's done something to strengthen the family tie, and the family tie has been broken from their perspective in America." Uh, are you sensing a correlation between a strengthening of family and that ability to work remote? Is there any advantage there?
Oh, there definitely are. And I think, for women who, like it or not, tend to bear the brunt of the care responsibilities in a family, the freedom to be able to say, okay, I'm going to break off at noon and do something that's useful for my family. I mean, that's huge. The ability to set your own schedule is huge. And I think a lot of office jobs have been designed like factory jobs, like where it's like almost like you're like cogs in a wheel. Whereas being remote allows you to really build that flexibility into your day. I mean, I remember when I was a young professor, I'd pick my kids up, I'd feed them dinner, and I'd be back at my desk till like 11 o'clock or midnight. And my husband would turn up sometime in the middle of that evening. I mean, it wasn't ideal, but it allowed us to do the things we needed to do as parents without, harming our kids or shirking on our work.
Yeah, I want to talk for a moment, if you allow me here, to talk a little bit about this political angle that we're dealing with right here. The federal government saying, well, the president saying, listen, federal employees, you've got to return to work. How much of a precedent does that set when you say, hey, we see the president, we see federal government now saying it's important for you to return to work. Now we're going to see more businesses and corporations follow suit. Is that what we're going to potentially see?
Potentially, for sure. I mean, they'll accept that as a precedent, but they're not the first, right? I mean, Amazon very famously has said back to work. Jamie Dimon wants people back in the office. So it's not they're not the only organization that said they really want that.
Mm-hmm. And how do we see things playing out in the future? I mean, obviously, this door has been open largely due to the pandemic. I mean, I think the pandemic, allowed the opportunity to see what the possibilities are. Do we see this being, something that will be the new era, if you will, for a lot of people, or will this be something where, as we said before the pandemic, well, we never thought about remote work like this. Will this be something now the door is going to be shut?
I don't think the door will be shut, particularly for high value employees. I think there's always going to be exceptions made for people that are considered to be, really important for whatever reason. I think it's going to be one more piece of the negotiation, and if you make the opportunity to be remote for some people, again, you're going to attract. You're going to be able to pull in people from a much bigger resource pool. You're going to be able to get people from wherever. So I think what we're going to continue to see is some kind of hybrid remote thing. And I think we forget the pandemic made it everybody, right?
Right,
That was the thing.
right.
A lot of people were working remote before that. I mean, if you think about salespeople or even executives, the amount of travel they were doing, the amount of, road warriors, right? That phrase was definitely here before the pandemic. And so those people weren't in the office anyway.
Yeah. What do you think we're going to be seeing by way of Gen Z? I mean, I'll put your professor hat on for a moment and just say, because when you think about Gen Z, a lot of them have a propensity to want to either work independently, be entrepreneurs, or have that ability to actually work from home. I think becoming accustomed to seeing what's happened in the pandemic and the opportunity to actually say, listen, you know what, working from home and working remotely is an option. Or I should say not home, but remotely is an option. And it's something that we can potentially see a lot of Gen Zers clinging to, because what I'm hearing and what studies are showing is that this is probably the most independent generation that we've seen in some time.
Yeah. Well, if I go back to my reference to we're moving into this digital world, right? Those people were born digital. I mean,
Right.
they've
First
grown
digital
up.
native
They've
generation,
never,
right?
they've never known what it's like to be not connected, to be, not on tech, to not be connected to this whole web of other people. And they're very comfortable building connections and culture that way. So I do think we're going to see a real shift in how those folks want to be managed and how they're going to participate in the workforce for sure.
Yeah. How do you see unions in playing out in this? You know, we got CBAs that are out there that are coming out, which is collective bargaining agreements. How does this play out?
Well, I think unions are going to have to update their playbook for this new kind of workforce, because the other thing that's happening now is much more gig work. Even if you look at big employers, a large portion of their workforces are contractors.
Mm.
And so the unions, the traditional union model is based on, 40-hour week and very predictable. And, I'm only working for one employer and so forth. So I think unions are going to have to get a lot smarter about gig work, freelancers, temporary work. And if you think about the future of work, a lot of it's going to be like the way we make movies, right? If you think about the way we make movies, you don't move up a hierarchy in making a movie. If you go to a big budget film, right? There's like 55 names at the beginning of the movie. That's because you create your career by the skills that you offer, the value that you bring, and so forth. And I think the rest of work is going to start to look more and more like that. So I think unions are going to have to figure out new models for covering those kinds of workers. I do think unions are potentially incredibly important in making sure that we have institutions that are suitable for this new kind of work, where I could be routinely working for two or three employers, for
Hmm.
not full-time hours, and maybe they're not even employment agreements. Maybe they're contract agreements. So we need new institutions to figure out how that's going to be fair to people.
It's going to be it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out over the next 5 to 10 years. Talking to our legal analysts, I've heard them say you can potentially see a lot of court cases with people challenging this because they're, it's a lifestyle issue, it's employment issue, and people are not just going to take that sitting down because they feel as though they have rights.
Mhm. Yeah, they do.
Yeah. Um, AI. We haven't talked about that for a moment. And, when we think about it, it's changing the way that we do business and changing the
Mhm.
way that we do a lot of things. How do you see the role of AI playing across the corporate sector?
Well, I think we're just beginning to discover that, and I'm very taken with the approach that Klarna has taken, the payments company, and their CEO has been really public, saying, "Hey, I've saved 700 jobs in my customer service operation. I've saved $10 million a year by using AI instead of paying photographers, and using a much smaller spend on my digital agency spending. I'm not having to pay translators. So I think a lot of work that can be put into a program is going to go to AI, and I think that's going to displace a lot of people.
Yeah. And when we look at that, we talk about unemployment and the unemployment rate right now. I don't think that we've really taken into, I think we have, in some ways we haven't really taken into full account the amount of people that will be impacted by this automation and AI, that jobs will be lost in business. I went to the bank, I mean, in a bank in New Jersey, and there was not a teller. It was only one person in a whole branch, and they were like, everything is automated. And, and she said to me, this is the beginning of the end. And I said, well, she may have a point there.
Yeah, but as I said, we're in this transition, and I think what we will discover is there are places where there will be new opportunities opened up. I don't know yet whether the jobs that are lost are going to be equivalently recovered. As again, this Klarna CEO says, you can't tell a 55-year-old translator, hey, you're getting a new job as a YouTube influencer.
Right, Right.
But I do think there will be new kinds of opportunities that open up. We just don't know what they are yet.
Yeah, I was thinking about a conversation that was had recently where we were talking about in one area where manufacturing jobs were pretty dominant. All those manufacturing jobs have pulled out. Now you have STEM jobs, and the people that are working these manufacturing jobs that made such great money and supported that middle class economy. Now all of a sudden you're asking them to come in and learn this skill set, and of course you're not going to be paid at this skill set because you're not there, and that imbalance that it creates, in the economy and communities, and you wonder about the shifting. And I think about right now, how we're in the middle, I guess we could say, of this really dynamic shift that is going to impact the way that we see business, the way that we see, automation, the way that we see productivity and effectiveness. It's a lot that's on the table right now.
There is. There is.
Yeah. What do you say that we should be keeping our eyes out for in the near future?
Well, I think certainly the progress of AI is one big one. I do think we need to keep an eye out on the policies around, the social justice angle. So I do a lot of work around, things like health equity and how do we make sure that opportunities are offered to people who need them. And I think that's a space where, there's a lot at play right now, and I think we'll need to be really paying attention to that.
Yeah. And for yourself, what are the conversations that are being had, in circles like yours, that maybe the wider public isn't? What are the concerns?
In terms of the world of work,
Yes.
well, I think there's a big concern about the fact that for many, many years, this is not a new thing, and this is not a work from home thing, but the workplace has treated employees basically as poorly performing robots. And so, a great resource on this is Zeynep Ton from MIT, who wrote a wonderful book called "The Case for Good Jobs." And her argument is, if we can stop thinking about employees purely as units of cost, but think about them as potential units of growth and revenue, we would have a completely different attitude about how we manage people. And I think we've still got some very wrong-headed ideas out there about how you deal with real human beings who are working for your organization.
There's this balance between efficiency and autonomy, right? I think that we have to learn how to navigate that balance. How do we better navigate it?
Well, I believe that if we give people the right tools and if we're clear about our objectives, if you have the right leadership, that human beings are ingenious. If they will rise to the occasion, if they're given the space to do that. So there's some wonderful theories about incentives. And William Baumol, who's a very famous economist, said, your entrepreneurial talent can be directed towards productive things, so value creation. It can be directed towards unproductive things like moving money around. Or if you're not careful, it can be directed towards destructive things. Like crime or drug dealing, and so you want to really think about the incentive structure that you're putting in place.
Mhm. Give me a moment to just unpack this here because when I'm thinking about some of the things that we're dealing with right now, really there is a lot of a lot of fallout, a lot of shrapnel that's out there, and one of those things that come into mind is like that of real estate and the ripple effect that it has with regards to real estate. Unpack that for me as far as real estate is concerned and how this is really impacting.
Well, commercial real estate, I'm presuming
Yeah.
you're. Yeah. Okay. So, well, a lot of companies are finding that they have a lot more space on their hand than they have bodies to fill it. And so you're seeing a lot of concern about downsizing space. You're seeing many former office buildings kind of going empty. And one of my colleagues talks about the urban doom loop, where you've got fewer people in the office and then the buildings can't cover their costs, and then they give up their leases, and so you've got all this empty space. Meanwhile, you've got a massive housing crisis, and one of the things he's talking about is, can we repurpose some of those office buildings into living space? Because most large cities right now have a huge housing crisis and a huge housing affordability crisis, so maybe there's an opportunity to repurpose some of that.
Yeah. And so as we look towards 2025, what are some of the dominant themes that maybe we should be, we'll probably be taking a look at and keeping an eye on? Of course, obviously remote work thing is really going to be huge as far as business is concerned. What other things come to mind for you?
Well, I think we're really on the brink understanding where, electrification comes in. We eventually are going to have to face the fact that we can't live on fossil fuels forever. We've been in denial about that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I do think the role of genders. We've got a big crisis right now with a lot of young men feeling very disengaged and not being pulled into the productive workforce. I think we've got a lot of tension around those things. And then, as your show suggests, the whole theme of social justice, we really need to think about how we're going to make our societies more fair.
Yeah. What are the things that you're hearing from your students? I mean, obviously they ask a lot of questions in your environment, and there's some things that they're saying. What are you seeing through their questions, their papers? Is there anything rising up that we can glean from?
Well, they're very interested in, how do I even think about building a career for a job that might not even exist today? Like, how do I prepare myself when the traditional disciplines and so forth are not necessarily what's going to lead me to a predictable career path?
Yeah. And so I want to thank you for taking the time and being with us today. Certainly a great conversation. A lot that we can pay attention to, but honestly, this workforce thing and whether you're going to work remotely or be in the office, it's going to be something we're going to be talking about for some time. And I want to thank you for bringing some light to these issues and really the things we need to pay attention to.
Hey, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
All righty, Rita McGrath. She is a professor at the Columbia Business School. I want to thank you so much for joining us. And listen, we are going to take a quick break. We encourage you to stay with us. We'll have more coming up right after this.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. "55% of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend. "34% of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it. Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit BronxNet.org to learn more.
We're gonna start the show right now. This is my favorite part. Ready in 5, 4, 3, 2. Hey, This is Angel, and I am one of the instructors for the in-studio production. Here at BronxNet, we offer classes that can help you elevate, expand, and start your television career. All you have to do is sign up at BronxNet.org/education. For the past 7 years, I have been in various productions, spanning from talk shows, independent films, news reports, art displays, teachings, musical performances, and many more. Ain't that right, Angel? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Angel. There are a lot of creative individuals that we're just waiting to sign up for the class. And if I may, can I also express Thank you, Angel. That's all the time we have left. Visit BronxNet.org/education and become a producer by taking the course. The class I offer is also in English, en español y también bilingüe. Nos vemos en la próxima clase.
What's up, creative family? Discover your voice with BronxNet Community Media classes. Are you ready to bring your ideas to life? At BronxNet, we offer television production classes for community members ages 18 and over, empowering you to share your vision with the world. Get certified in field production, in-studio production, and our new exciting addition, podcast production. Once certified, you can create your own show to air on one of our 6 TV channels. It all starts with our free Unleash Your Ideas Masterclass, designed to help you plan your show idea and set you up for success on your production journey. This class is offered at the beginning of each month for your convenience. Our dedicated BronxNet team is here to support, encourage, and uplift you every step of the way. Join us and become a part of the creative force that engages and inspires the Bronx community and beyond. Sign up today and start your media journey with BronxNet. Visit BronxNet.org/education to learn more and register. Let's create something amazing together.
And welcome back. The United States prison system has long been a site of racial oppression, disinformation, and social control. From alliances between prison officials and white supremacists to the suppression of black political movements, mass incarceration has served as the microcosm for a larger system of governance rooted in white supremacy. Join me now is the Assistant Professor of Sociology at the University of Southern California, Dr. Brittany Friedman, and thank you so much for joining us. So when we talk about this, Dr. Friedman, I gotta, just unpack for a moment that when we talk about the prison system, and white supremacy, hand in hand.
Absolutely. I mean, the prison system is grounded in chattel slavery in the United States and the legacy of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery except for as punishment for a crime. And that was done strategically because it allowed for people who were newly allegedly freed to become re-enslaved through debt peonage, which was often charging people, Black people, with false claims so that they could be incarcerated, and then they could be re-enslaved in this way through prisons and through work camps, which we see in, for example, in Toni Morrison's Beloved, right? There's many depictions of this in, amazing Black literature and also among, Black scholarship on the topic, which is where I situate my work to, really show that it is also this connection between corrupt law enforcement and white supremacists that is a legacy of chattel slavery in our prison system as well.
I forgot to mention at the top, and I should have mentioned too, that you're also the author of a book, Carceral Apartheid, and How Lies and White Supremacists Run Our Prisons. And, want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about this because, for yourself, Dr. Friedman, you've had the opportunity to really look at this and see how long this has been systemic.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what I uncovered in my book is quite horrendous. So I set out to really understand, the rise of the Black Power movement behind bars and also understand what preceded it, what institutional practices within prisons really set the stage where incarcerated Black people needed to organize themselves, similar to how we saw on the outside, right, during the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Power movement. why did they have to organize in such a structured way to fight back? And so my book starts in the 1950s, looking at how Black people were targeted by the Department of Corrections in California, how they were labeled as security threat risks. Before any sort of protest even started, it's a preemptive label. And they were segregated and disappeared into adjustment centers. And then on top of that official strategy of decimation and control, the Department of Corrections also allowed correctional officers to align themselves with incarcerated Nazis who would later found the Aryan Brotherhood, and really, sustained what became this massive organization that we know today. And so I really center that legacy. And I show how incarcerated Black people were political prisoners who were organizing themselves amongst, different strands of political beliefs, but found a commonality, obviously, in needing to fight against this system of carceral apartheid, which I argue is a larger governing strategy for society. And, as you said earlier, like prisons are a microcosm of this. And I think one of the best cases to study to show it.
Yeah, when we look at the prison system, obviously we understand that we make up not the majority of the population, but the minority of the population, but yet and still we have a majority when it comes to incarceration. That number continues to rise. The questions about, mass incarceration, the criminal justice system, all those things continue to center themselves. And then we look at where we are right now. We have January 6th, and you had January 6th with the insurrection. And yet and still, there's an imbalance, because when you look at what's going on right now, you see many of those persons that were associated with January 6th receiving presidential pardons. And that whole history, if you will, of, from, inequality to racial segregation within the prison is something that I know that you hold near and dear and you speak to.
Yes, absolutely. Lies and illusions, right? They are foundational to how white supremacy functions as a structure in our society, and really influential in how carceral apartheid operates as a tool of political warfare against Black communities, against Indigenous communities, and Latinx communities. And so, for example, in now President Trump's use of the term political prisoners for the January 6th rioters, that is a longstanding tradition amongst white supremacist groups. The same, illusionary moniker was used again as a term to talk about the defendants in the Ku Klux Klan trials of 1871 to 1872. And basically their supporters in South Carolina at the time were arguing, they were political prisoners being held by the federal government, as opposed to being, violent white supremacists that had just waged a war of violence and lynching and sexual assault against Black communities in South Carolina. And another parallel to this is how in that, what actually, really sparked and set off that wave of violence was because it was the first election where people who had been recently released, and a part of Reconstruction were allowed to vote. And so Black men were allowed to vote in the 1870 election. And that is what kicked off this retaliatory violence by the Klan and this collaboration with law enforcement. And we see the same thing with January 6th. It is a backlash, if you will, to the racial uprisings and protests in the wake of the murders of George Floyd. And, it's just it's such a playbook, right? That we continue to see the level of gaslighting, the level of using terms like political prisoner, which we know apply to real people, applies to incarcerated Black people. It applies to people who are incarcerated because of the Puerto Rican freedom movement, right? Incarcerated because of the indigenous rights movement, environmental justice movements. Like, there are true political prisoners in the United States, and it is not the January 6th rioters. And we will continue to see this playbook. And my main interest is really pointing out that it is a historical through line. And so that gives us an advantage because we can see how this will play out rather than, simply responding.
Let me come to you a little bit closer to home. For those of you just joining us, we've got Dr. Brittany Friedman, who's the assistant professor of sociology at the University of Southern California. Let's talk about this here because I want to really get your take on the California Department of Corrections. And as we talk about the California Department of Corrections, there is a role and a correlation that's played between the California Department of Corrections and the police process, prison policies that we're seeing right now. Talk to us about the correlation between that, the California Department of Corrections, and the national prison policies.
Yes, so California has long been a leader when it comes to prison policy, and is a very great case study to understand how practices emerge and how they become a structure of white supremacy. And so what I found in California is, this decimation of Black political protests behind bars, of labeling Black organizing as prison gang formation, and criminalizing protest, right? That is a long-term strategy that is also used on the outside, and we continue to see it, right? With the criminalization of Black Lives Matter, with the criminalization of, there's current protests right now happening in my city in Los Angeles because of Trump's orders around immigration. And so this is a strategy by the states, because once you criminalize protests, it allows you to bring in law enforcement. It allows you to use these tools of decimation that I document in my book to, essentially rewrite the narrative and to create a false story that the state is simply here to protect us, when in reality, the state is deploying these strategies of control to keep communities subdued. And, California is very much a hallmark of this. And so it's it's a perfect case study. Another reason too is because I found in my archival research that I did on these systems of control that, prison officials in other states were writing to California prison officials. I found official letters saying, for example, and I'm paraphrasing, how do you deal with these people, right? How do you deal with this protest or with people who are aligned seemingly with the civil rights movement or who are in reading groups? What do you do with them? And then California prison officials responding in official correspondence and saying, oh, we identify them and we segregate them as soon as they start talking to the general prison population. And so it's like it's very clear evidence of what they're doing, but also evidence that there is an informational network that is spreading this logic, and that correctional systems across the United States have long been sharing information and strategies. And it's why, in part, you see the same policies popping up across the country and not just in one state.
Yeah. There are some huge parallels that we see when we look around the nation. We look at January 6th. That was an insurrection that I remember exactly where I was. I was right in the heart of it, like literally outside of D.C., and had to deal with them on the highway and in Baltimore, it was, right outside D.C., Baltimore area, Ellicott City. I'll never forget that day because I thought that if I wasn't around I wasn't around during the time of the Klan, but I felt as though that this was very symbolic of a 2020, year 2020 Klan rally. And you can draw, and I've heard many people draw inferences that there's a lot of, you can put a lot of similarities there. When you look at what happened with January 6th, and you look at what happened with the Klan, how would you correlate?
I would say that what we're seeing, these spikes in white supremacist organizing, they really come when Black communities in particular, right? When we stand up and organize ourselves, when we're forming alliances with other communities of color that are similarly oppressed, and we are, taking to the streets, we are using our voice. Our voice is our greatest liberation. I firmly believe that. And looking at history, and you see these spikes in white supremacist organizing comes whenever we organize ourselves and when we stand up and we say, no, not today, right? And we look at our ancestors and the generations before us, there's these key moments in history where we come together and say, not today, we're not doing that, and fight back. And so that is why you see such a violent response in protests and insurrections like January 6th, and really, coordinated organizing that mirrors the Klan, right? And they're flying the same flags. If you look at the images of January 6th, right, they're flying some of the very same flags that our ancestors had flown in their face.
Yeah.
As well.
And as I look at this, this is a growing tension that goes on across our country. It extends into communities. It extends even into the collegiate atmosphere in which you're in. Talk to us about that collegiate atmosphere. What's it like? What's that political climate like? What's this climate like on college campuses right now, given the fact of all that we're experiencing?
I think that it is a very difficult time to be a college student. I would say that, but in the context of history, we look and we can see that college campuses have long been a site of, political organizing. And I think that right now we're just seeing a continuation of that. I think, as faculty members, also, faculty are finding support in each other. And then the fact that many of us are networked, we aren't, siloed in academia. We are networked with community organizations. We are networked with each other. And so that gives us a sense of strength, especially as we're seeing these, right, attacks on DEI, all of the attacks on critical race theory, right? I write in critical race theory. I'm also a Black feminist scholar. Much of my scholarship, depending upon which state I'm a professor in, would be banned. But I know, with our own organizing and our networks, we refuse to be silenced, because as soon as you allow a government to write history for you, that's when that fascism, it's not coming, it's already here.
Right. And when you look at what's going on now on college campuses, we're located on one actually, and the conversation today was that, hey, we had to scrap the Black History Month program, and we had to kind of put it in a different kind of way. We have to scrap what's going on with women's history and put it in a different, in a different kind of way. When we look at all the scrapping that's going on, it seems as though that, and I've heard that from the White House, what they say is, yeah, we're not celebrating Black history, we're celebrating American history. And when you hear stuff like that, what's your thought process?
My immediate reaction to hearing stuff like that is, wow, white men can be very fragile. Because that's the one group that is, they're not facing any sort of erasure from history, right? They're trying to, are really leading the charge in a misogynistic and racist charge in rewriting history, and trying to silence the contributions of women, of Black people, of Indigenous people, of people of Latinx descent, to society. And so that's honestly my first thought is when a population is working so hard to distort the narrative and working so hard to scrap knowledge about other communities, then they are quite fragile and not as strong as they are leading you to believe. So that gives me hope, because I'm like, well, at least we know that the opponent or that is in charge of this wave is quite weak.
Right. When you think about the browning of America, and the fact that there are a lot of people who are upset that the browning of America would lead to whites not being the majority anymore in a short amount of time, a lot of people can not understand, but a lot of people are now, the light is coming on for a lot of people to say, listen, this is the reason why you have situations where you're talking about deportation, mass incarceration, things like that. Whatever can be done to remove the browning of America footprint from America's society, all is being done right now in this, what I would call, last-ditch effort to avoid what is the inevitable. When we look at the prison, the school to prison pipeline, we look at the prison systems that we see right now, and you're an expert in this field right here. You get to see just how much incarceration was the tool that was used to really hamper the browning of America, to keep America from being populated. Even though we're a minority of the population, there's no reason that we should be a majority of the inmate population.
Yes, and if you look exactly to the point that you are saying, that when you look at the campaigns that the government has waged against indigenous populations, against Black communities, and against Latinx communities, and against Asian communities, right? When you look at these wars, I would say, and colleagues would say, these wars that are waged against communities, it's coming from the legacy and strategies of colonialism. It is a settler population that first and foremost encountered a brown population, right? And then used imprisonment in the form of massacring communities, in the form of extracting children and sending them to native boarding schools, which were horrendous, and then in the form of siphoning communities onto reservations, right? Those are all tools of colonialism that are examples of incarceration. And we can see the same thing with each community, right? With the Black community in terms of jails and prisons, right? That's very blatant incarceration. When we look at immigrant detention, that's waged against all communities of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, right? We can see that incarceration is the tool of colonialism that was here from the beginning, that continues to this day. And so that is a playbook that is continuing to be wielded, is removing people from the population.
Talk about the media for me and the perception and the narrative that it plays. We do a lot in the area of bad portrayal. I remember, my initial days of journalism, we used to spend a lot of time capturing people on what we call the perp walk. That's walking people out, showing the camera on people as they're being arrested. But we show them being arrested, but then we don't show when the charges are dropped. We don't show when the charges were wrong. But there's this narrative that sometimes we can falsely create just right there in the media. So give me your perspective and your study on the media and how it's really played a role in the perception of crime and punishment.
So the media has long been I would say a handmaiden of white supremacy and of colonial suppression, right? The media has been at the forefront of fueling moral panics on behalf of politicians. And a moral panic is when there is this heightened fear and anxiety around, usually criminality or what is considered deviance by communities of color. And that is used to then justify changes to policy, to increase the incarceration of communities of color. And so when we look at, right, the war on crime, the war on drugs, all of these are actually wars on communities of color. They're wars on the Black community. And the media is fueling the moral panic that then gives a false legitimacy to politicians to wield what is, again, a colonial agenda of using incarceration to remove communities, to prevent communities from taking back land, or to prevent the fact that, people, right, like that are a part of the African diaspora, we are all indigenous to somewhere, but our ancestors were then extracted from their indigenous lands and brought here against their will to be enslaved here. And so all of these tools, right, you can trace them to a colonial rhetoric. And it is why, in my opinion, the best analyses of incarceration, of disinformation, and racism, they really center colonialism as being, a continuation.
Right. So when we talk about your book, what is it that you want people to take away from the reading and the research that has been done?
So I want people to take away from carceral apartheid that lies are fundamental to how white supremacy operates as a structure that is all-encompassing, that incarceration is a tool of political warfare and is one tool, that alliances with white supremacist civilians is another tool. But then finally, that, we don't have to lose hope in the face of a system that feels so heavy and hegemonic, and that we can't defeat it. I think that's also the goal. The goal is to stifle hope and to control the fate of minoritized populations. But in reality, we all have a role to play. I truly believe that when you have the ability to clearly see something and how it operates, it can no longer control you because you can see it. And that goes that goes for interpersonal relations as well as our relations to larger societal institutions. And so I don't want people to lose hope. I want people to think about, what is my role and how can I become networked even more with my community to move forward.
Dr. Friedman, we got to leave it there. Dr. Brittany Friedman, who is the Assistant Professor of Sociology at the University of Southern California, talking about her book, Carceral Apartheid, and then also shaping a little bit for us, a little bit about the history of the prison system. Great conversation, great information. And thank you, Dr. Friedman, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All righty. Well, I want to let you know we come to the end of our show today. Hope that you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Social Justice Forum. If you want to rewatch this week's episode, or you can do that by going to the Recablecast right here on BronxNet.org. Now, if you want to join the conversation, present your point of view, visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week. We'll continue to elevate the discussion and also bring some further awareness on the issues across the globe. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, saying take care. God bless.